Hey, so we're on our Sunday call and we have a very important question, which is something which has been like the anthem of so much of what I've been talking to men about for like the last 16 plus years. I don't know how many at this point, but it has to do with sex and our culture and masculinity and how we see men and how we see ourselves as men and how we see sex and sexuality. And it's the craziest thing, and this applies to women too, but in the world of men, we're mainly gonna touch upon this. See, when we have a culture that represses this, when we have a culture that then has a reaction to that repression, and then we have a culture of people just trying to figure it out and do their nature, do what feels right in their body, we come up in this massive conflict. And this is where we're at with a lot of men and women today in our culture, is that we have people believing in a myth about sex that's based on archetypes, that's based on people not having enough of it, that don't feel like proper men, that don't feel like proper women, and they're putting the image of what that is out there and they're trying to chase it. And then they're trying to chase what that image is supposed to become, and they're trying to get it. And what's interesting about this is all a reaction to the previous 50 years of what our culture created, which was a different image of men and women. And what's even more interesting about this is if we were to get back into actual communication with one another, if we were to get back into how to connect with one another as real people, as the me, not the image, not the front, not the any of these things, we would start to come up with a solution for it. So where we're at is we have a culture that sells sex, that promotes it, that uses it, that advertises it in every way, that uses it as a tool of trying to get you to do things. Yet we don't have a culture that truly appreciates what it is. What it is and the experiences of it, we associate all this pain around it, which there is pain, there's legitimate pain. There's not a denial of that. But at the expense of the true experience of love, of connection, of the full scope of what sex is, which is going to be carnal things, which is going to have things that are, you know, not the most favorable things to talk about in public, where people see as private moments with one another. We have an experience that we're denying ourselves from because we call that toxic, or we call that bad, or we call that something that is taboo. And when we make that happen, when we have a natural urge to do these things, it is natural. We have a natural urge to want to have sex. We might want to have promiscuity. We might want to have sex with a stranger. We might want a relationship. We might want love. When we do those things of not being able to talk about those things, we create a rebellion culture activating them. And then what promotes it? And this is what we see. We see this. We see this with, you know, women and men broadcasting like, oh man, we got to be like promiscuous. We got to have sex and da 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 da, and it's awesome. It's the coolest thing. But I'm going to do this at the denial of relationships, or the possibility of relationships, and see relationships as a sign of weakness or lack of independence. And then we see the flip side of things going like, no, we want relationships, we want monogamy, we want blah, 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 blah. And we want that, and if we want that, we have to get rid of the promiscuity, and we have to get rid of all these things. And when we don't recognize that this phenomenon of sexuality exists within our culture, then we start to make it almost impossible to experience it for what it is. Sex within you right now is going to be a huge scope of things. And you're going to have to experience all of it. You're going to have to experience so much of it. And in experiencing it, you're going to have to then start understanding what was right and wrong, what is good for you and bad for you in these situations. This is part of the experience. So on the call, we had a situation where there was a guy who was having sex with a girl. And in this situation, this girl had a boyfriend, and he was like a side dude. And you can think about that whatever you want. And this is one of the things, like culture would say that's right, culture would say that's wrong, and there's different subgroups saying that's right and wrong. And when there's two different subgroups saying that's right and wrong, you have to go to one to get your answer, and then you're not understanding the full spectrum of it. The fact of the matter is this is going to happen, and if you're a sexually active man, it could happen to you. It doesn't have to happen to you. You can decide, but some people do this, and sometimes it falls into your lap, and it's a very, very common thing. Now, if this does happen, you also have to understand what happens in this. Everything changes in that ecosystem where you're a third party, whether it's somebody cheating, whether it's you're in an open relationship, of all these different things, it's part of a huge dynamic with the full spectrum of things. So part of the problem with this gentleman's idea was that, like, man, I'm doing something wrong, I've made a mistake, I did all the wrong things, blah, 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 and all this judgment and all this guilt and all this pain, and that could be the actual thing. But when we're trapped in a cultural narrative which is polarizing something, we cut out the human experience. And there's a great value that comes from that human experience. There's a great value of something where you're going to get a lot of stuff wrong. So in your life, you are going to do things which aren't going to be right, that your desire led you to. And it's going to be outside of sex, it's going to be outside of relationships, it's going to be in money, it's going to be in all the different things that you have within your life. When that happens, you have to start to think, how can I find the solution in myself with this? How can I learn what's right and wrong? How can I fix the things that, make me do the wrong things within it? And how can I accentuate the right things? And this is your responsibility to do as a human being. This is your thing to be able to walk. And it's so amazing to me because I'll tell you this right now, some of the biggest leaders in my life, some of the people that I would consider the most spiritual, the most wise, the people that I turn to in heavy moments that, know the long road to peace and so on, they're all people that have huge backgrounds of experience. Within that experience, there are absolutely things that polarize the culture that they were in their lifetime, or currently polarize the modern day culture. And that's crazy. So when you deal with somebody that lied, cheated, stole as their way of life for a huge amount of their life and then changed from that, you get the full spectrum of experience in that solution. You realize that there's not just one right way to do things. And when we start to look at the highest levels of what a relationship is, what a healthy sex life is, and if we go into all the different attributes of humanity, of masculinity, of femininity, and so on, when you get to the highest levels of building wealth, the highest levels of knowing the self, when you get to the highest levels of being an actualized human being, when you get to the highest levels of where you're going to be happy, where you're going to know yourself, where you're going to lead, where you want to bring into your best relationships and your best families, they have the entire experience within it. They have everything in that. They don't just know that stealing is wrong. They don't just know that lying is wrong. They understand the entire experience of that. Whether they've done it or not, whether they did it to excess or not, that's a lot less important. But the fact is that they understand it. This is kind of a sidetrack and a little bit of an offshoot to the main topic of this, but this is kind of like how my coaching has gone for many, many years. We started off with sex, we started off with dating, and it turned into an overall philosophy of humanity, of masculinity, of the masculine and feminine coming together, and really how to be your best self. But check this out. Our society and our culture relies completely on judgment. It builds our identities of who we are. It carries who we vote for or what we think is right and wrong and the different groups that we associate with. It's all based on judgment. It's all based on this idea of being able to see what is right and wrong. Judgment is massively important in our society, but so many people get it wrong. Because in order to judge, you have to be wise. You have to know the full story. In fact, in the American court system, the attempt of what it's always trying to do is to have a judge that will see both sides. That in order to have that judgment, he needs to have all the evidence. He needs to cut certain gossip out. He needs to cut the cultural narrative out. He needs to have a jury that could perhaps guide him in certain ways, and he gets both sides to argue their points. When it comes to your personal judgments of self, and especially when it comes to sex, we rely immediately on unwise judgments and reactionary judgments. We don't know the full story of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a sexual man, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a sexual woman. We think we can only explore that with these rigid boundaries or rules around it. We think that we can only find freedom to the urges within us through this heavy hand of culture and through this way of culture that is basically relying on a judgment based on reactivity. And a judgment based on reactivity comes from fear, activated in rebellion, and rewarded and prized through whoever is the loudest person in it. And that is a terrible way to create morality, to create the self, and to create your best self, which is going to influence the culture that you're living in. That all being said, when it comes to sex and sexuality, this is a dialogue that we need to have more with one another. This is a dialogue that we need to talk about. This is a dialogue that we need to have that isn't based on shame. And this is a dialogue that will have judgment involved in it, but it has to come from wisdom. And if it doesn't, we are creating a culture that will inevitably disrespect itself. All right, this was a tough video to make. I think we're good on that, but if you'd like to be on our calls, come and join us and look at the links down below to sign up and get interactive with whatever it is that we're doing. We talk about a lot of different things that come into men's development, and just to be honest, I've been doing this for a very, very long time. I've worked very successfully with many different men, and we talk about everything that makes a man. If you're at any point in your life and you want to get it better, you could always use wisdom and a group and tried and true people that have been there and done that, which is how our group exists and lives upon. Check out the details down below, and we are good to go.